Night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jules and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jules and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil here on GB News, and we've got a busy show lined up for you today.
We have indeed. After another turbulent week in Westminster, we'll be joined by James Heal from The Spectator for his analysis.
Following an official report this week led by Baroness Casey, we'll be asking a former Met police officer and a leading think tank, is it time for police reform?
And is a new axis of evil forming between Russia and China? Michael Day, the chief foreign commentator from the I newspaper, will be joining us to discuss.
And as ever, we want to hear from you. So get involved with the show. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before we start the show, here's your headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Esther. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10, your top stories from the GB newsroom. A post-Brexit deal for Northern Ireland will be signed off this morning after MPs backed the Windsor framework. In a meeting chaired by the Foreign Secretary and European Commission, the UK and EU will formally adopt the plan, which was agreed following talks last month. MPs voted for the Stormont break on Wednesday, giving the Northern Ireland Assembly power to object to EU rules, despite continued opposition from the DUP. James Cleverly told Marko Sefcovic he's grateful for his help.
This is not the corporate thanks of the British government, this is the personal thanks of me, James Cleverly, to you, Maro Sefcovic, for the commitment that you have put in, and of course the work that has been done by your wider team in getting us to what is a really good place that we are genuinely grateful.
Protesters are demonstrating outside Downing Street, where the Israeli Prime Minister is meeting Rishi Sunak. Benjamin Netanyahu's in London as thousands protest in Israel and here against a law that's been approved by his right-wing coalition. Critics say it's designed to shield him from his corruption trial. Talks at Downing Street are expected to focus on strengthening strategic ties between the two nations, as well as Iran's nuclear programme. Ofsted says school inspections will continue despite calls for them to be suspended. Unions representing teachers and head teachers want checks to be paused while a review's carried out. It's after head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life in January while waiting for a report which downgraded her school to the lowest possible rating. The Ofsted chief says stopping inspections wouldn't be in the best interests of children. The Shadow Health Secretary says he's concerned about the upcoming junior doctors' strike. Wes Streeting is calling on the government to resolve the pay dispute ahead of next month's industrial action. The British Medical Association, which is asking for a 35% pay rise, says no credible offer was made during talks on Wednesday. The union announced members will walk out for 4 days from April the 11th.
I'm really worried about these junior doctors' strikes, and I'm worried that unless people at that stage in their career have great specialist roles to move into once they've finished their junior doctor phase of their career, we're going to lose people to countries like Australia, to Canada, where aggressive recruitment of UK doctors is already underway. So I hope the government can resolve the junior doctors' strikes amicably.
A Premier League footballer is being investigated for a third sexual offence. The 29-year-old, who's not been named, was first arrested in July last year over allegations of rape. He was further arrested while in custody following claims he raped another woman in 2021. The Met Police says the man was interviewed last month under caution for a third offence, alleged to have taken place in February last year. The footballer denies the allegations and his bail has been extended. The French government says it's ready to welcome King Charles to the country despite ongoing protests. Earlier this week, Buckingham Palace cast doubt on the state visit because of the violent demonstrations taking place across the country. Activists have been protesting for 9 days over government plans to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. Late last night, the Bordeaux Town Hall was set alight, with the cause still being determined. There was a larger than expected pickup in retail sales last month, with trade returning to its pre-pandemic levels. The Office for National Statistics reported a 1.2% increase in February compared to the previous month. Experts had predicted a rise of just 0.2%. The ONS says the broader picture for retail, though, remains subdued, with little real growth over the last 18 months because of the cost of living crisis. And ever fancied walking in the footsteps of the king? Well, now you can, as long as you promise to take your shoes off. For the first time in living memory, visitors will be allowed to stand in the exact spot where King Charles will be crowned inside Westminster Abbey on May the 6th. Specially guided tours will include access to the medieval mosaic, the Cosmati pavement. You'll have to wear socks, though. No bare feet will be allowed to protect the 13th century flooring. This is GBNews, bringing more as it happens now, though. It's back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Have you ever fancied walking in the King's Steps there? Are you going to go along? But keep your socks on. Absolutely keep your socks on.
Just worship at your footsteps.
Oh, thank you. I gave you an opportunity to say that. And everybody's witnessed it. Now, we're joined throughout the show today by Deputy Leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane, and Chairman of Lodestone Communications, David Weil. So good morning to you both. But 7 members of the Privileges Committee now hold the political fate of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson in their hands as they weigh up whether Johnson deliberately misled the Commons over the Downing Street lockdown parties.
Whatever the result, does this mark the end of Boris Johnson's frontline political career?
Well, joining us now is James Heal, The Spectator's political correspondent. So, first question, does this mark the end of Boris Johnson's frontline political career?
Well, Esther, I remember when similar things were said after he resigned over Chequers a few years ago. And of course, a year or so later, he was back in number 10, centre of the action. You can never write off Boris Johnson, but I think that he has emerged from the Privileges Committee as a slightly diminished figure, and he's now got a battle on his hands.
Well, do you think that what happened at the committee will have changed anybody's opinion about Boris Johnson? Or because what it seemed to me from the reactions I saw is that all the people who supported Boris Johnson said he was absolutely, he did really well and all the rest of it. And people who didn't like Boris Johnson said it was an absolute disaster. I mean, do you actually think it changed anybody's perspective about Boris Johnson?
I would say probably not many people, because obviously this has been going on for the best part of about 18 months now. We've also seen so much briefing on both sides. All of Boris Johnson's arguments have been tested out in the press by allies saying this and that, pointing to the committee's biases, etc. But I think it really depends on what the 7 MPs are going to come up with. And I think you could tell from some of their questioning some of the likely outcomes of this. I think you saw Harriet Harman making the comparison with the speedometer, saying if you're going 100 miles per hour, do you really need someone else to tell you that's breaking the law? I think also what was interesting was Charles Walker at the end raised a really interesting question, which is that maybe he recklessly misled the House, but not deliberately, which, of course, where does that leave us in the territory of this? And I think that although you look at public opinion, I saw a poll today which said that 2/3 of the public think that Boris Johnson has misled the House. It's whether you can do so deliberately. And ultimately, can you really assess what he told the committee about, which was in his heart? So I will be very interested to see the report when it comes out. But as you say, Philip, I think that at this stage, not many minds are really being shifted, because we all have an opinion of Boris Johnson one way or the other.
People watching him said that he seemed like a different character, though. He wasn't ruffling his hair, he wasn't playing the Joker, taking it really seriously. In the papers today, they say Johnson's on a charm offensive, getting ready should there be a by-election in his seat.
Yes, well, we reported last week that he was readopted for a seat of Uxbridge and South Ruislip, and there was a lot of obviously speculation that he might do the so-called chicken run and go to a constituency which is a much safer majority. I think that's ultimately because when you're Prime Minister, obviously it's very difficult to get out about the constituency. He's obviously been going around the world making these speeches, so he's trying to sort of prepare for the local ground troops, etc. On current polling trends, I saw Lord Hayward say today that he would almost certainly lose that seat, because I think the Labour are predicted to win with a majority of somewhere sort of a margin of 15%. It's obviously a difficult time for him, but I do wonder perhaps if on the committee, obviously there's 4 Conservatives out of 7, I do wonder if any Conservatives, whatever you think of Boris, really want a by-election at this stage, given how the polls are constantly showing a 15-point Labour lead.
Some of his supporters are saying, actually, he wanted to go to a safer seat. There could be a positive outcome to losing the seat, that he can go actually to a safer one.
There's an interesting argument, actually, and I think, I'm going to a political conference this weekend. I can't be fascinated to take the temperature of the political grassroots. We've got the National Conservative Convention today as well in the West Midlands. And there are certainly associations across the country, Esther, which would, I think, happily endorse Boris Johnson as their candidate. I think that although his public ratings are pretty low right now, about -50, in the party he does still have those pockets of support, and he'll always be remembered as the man who got Brexit done. Ultimately, I think that he would like to come stay on and maybe not go down in the Privileges Committee. But if he does do that, then I think that there'll be plenty of places that will want to have him back.
James, just one of the other big issue of the week was the Northern Ireland Windsor framework vote in Parliament. What's your analysis of that? Was that a good week for Rishi Sunak? Was the fact that 22 Tory MPs voted against it, was that good for him? Was that lower than people had anticipated? Or when people added on the abstentions and said, well, 70 Tory MPs didn't vote for it, Is that something that he should be worried about? Will he be pleased or worried by the events of this last week?
I think you can be pleased from this, the events of this last week. I think someone in number 10 has been reading Sun Tzu and only attacking when you're from a position of strength, because they held this vote, they scheduled it for the same afternoon that there was the Privileges Committee investigation into Boris Johnson. That sort of distracted, I think, Rishi Sunak's enemies a little bit in terms of firing which way. Ultimately, as you say, only 20 Tory MPs voted against this, and there's been a bit of spinning around this, saying, there were abstentions. Well, I don't really see how people like Grant Shapps, who didn't vote, member of the Cabinet, obviously, people like Simon Hoare, who didn't vote, or Maria Miller, can really be said to be members of the European Research Group. I think ultimately the problem was that the ERG had too many captains and not enough privates in it. There were some great big-name figures who came out against the deal. Boris Johnson himself, Liz Truss, Ian Duncan-Smith, 3 former Tory leaders, but they just don't command the forces anymore. And the kindest thing you can say about that is that they're a victim of their own success. They got Brexit done, most of it, in 2019. I think the show has now moved on.
And just finally, James, Keir Starmer obviously did his big speech about crime this week. Was that a sign of his growing confidence that he was sort of in effect moving on to what is historically seen as a Conservative territory, or was it a bit of an own goal because it was exposed that he'd stopped all those Jamaicans being repatriated who went on to commit some more crimes? Was it a good week or a bad week for Keir Starmer?
I think Keir Starmer and Labour have had a few bad weeks, actually. And I think that you saw that in their response to the budget, and you saw this in the crime speech yesterday. I thought it was most telling, actually, that even the BBC News cut away from him after just 3 minutes. And it's because there was not much new or interesting, really, that he was saying. And I think it's been overshadowed by the events of the Windsor framework and obviously what happened with Boris Johnson as well. This is obviously Labour's attempt to kind of take some kind of stance on security issues. One of Rishi Sunak's 5 messages is about stopping the small boats. Labour can't really talk about that, so they're instead trying to pivot to talking about crime and cuts in public services and the justice system. So it's an attempt to move away from a kind of Tory-friendly area into a much more Labour-focused friendly area, which is about public spending, which obviously they're very much in favour of. So I think it was an attempt, but I don't think it really had the cut-through that Keir Starmer and the people around him would have been hoping for.
James Hale, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're going to take this conversation into the studio here now with David Wilde and Rebecca Jane. So going back to that point, do you think it's been a good week or a bad week for Keir Starmer?
I think it's been a fairly even week. I mean, it's one of these situations where governments lose elections, and it's quite a low bar for opposition leaders to get over in the end. I think the focus on Boris Johnson obviously hasn't helped the Tories, and I would say that Labour is trying to move onto the Tories' ground, but it's just trying to sort of flesh out the fact that Keir Starmer exists. And in that sense, I don't think it's been that great a week. I don't think it's been that bad a week.
Interesting. People say we know who Keir is, but what are his big ideas? And only things that we know about are things that he's possibly going to reverse on, which is self-ID. That's gone wrong in Scotland, but he's not saying he's going to reverse that. And then also, as Philip pointed out there, the criminals that he campaigned to stop being exported back to Jamaica. So he's not got a big idea and he's slipping around on what he has got.
And as I said, I just don't think it's that high a bar he's got to get over as a leader of the opposition. I mean, I think it's always got to be looked at in context of the government of the day. And I think that the country was in chaos in the 70s, it voted for Thatcher. It was in chaos at 2010, it voted for Cameron. The big question is, can Rishi Sunak make it look as if the ship of state looks halfway sensible, going in a sensible direction by the time of the next election? And I think Keir Starmer, frankly, all he has to do is, walk in a straight line and chew gum. And I think he is doing that.
Rebecca, I wanted to ask you about the vote on the Windsor framework this week, obviously from a UKIP perspective. 22 Conservative MPs voted against it, a few more abstained. It's difficult to know which ones were just absent and which ones actually made a point of abstaining. What did you make of that rebellion from a UKIP perspective?
I think it was disappointing that it wasn't bigger because I was actually quite surprised that it did go through. I wasn't expecting it to, if I'm being brutally honest, because the Windsor framework is completely and utterly flawed. We can't keep saying we've got Brexit done because we haven't got Brexit done. It's not a thing. Northern Ireland is still under some EU legislation, and that will never be acceptable acceptable for anybody that voted for Brexit. So the Windsor framework is not the answer. It was a bit of a, I think it's been called a sticking plaster. It is. It's completely useless, but so is Rishi Sunak. So, hey.
Do you accept that it's better than what was there before that Boris Johnson left in the original deal? That in that sense, it might not be what you would want, and it might not be perfect. But do you accept it is at least better than the status quo?
Marginally. I'll let you have that. It is marginally better, but why bother to do something that's only half-hearted? Do the job properly, for goodness sake.
But the fact that it went through with such a majority, wasn't it? It went through with such a majority. Is that a threat in a way to UKIP?
I do feel like the Conservatives' PR tour that they are currently on, the redemption tour, it is landing a little, and people are forgetting about all the chaos that they have actually let unfold, and the absolute state of the country as it is today is all of their fault. People are forgetting, but people do forget, so that's why we've got to keep on going.
Or do people just want to move on, David?
I honestly think I've actually got a lot of family in Northern Ireland, and they want to move on. You leave a political vacuum in Northern Ireland, and there are armed militias. That poor detective who got shot the other day. It needs to be settled down, and we need to move on. And I actually think Rishi Sunak has done quite a statesman-like thing here in doing that. And I actually think he's done Keir Starmer a very big favour, because if he comes to power, this is one more thing that he doesn't have to do.
but the DUP say they're not going to join the power sharing agreement, so this isn't over, is it?
I honestly think I think the politics of Northern Ireland and why a lot of my family are unionist. OK, and they completely disagree with the DUP. There isn't really anybody for them to vote for, actually, in Northern Ireland. I think the fact that we just need to smooth things out, look to the future. Can we please look? What is this country going to do, right, for the next 30 years? What are we going to produce? How are we going to grow the economy? We need to focus on that and stop fiddling around with little rules.
David, Rebecca, thank you for now. Coming up with a fresh round of junior doctor strikes announced for April, should the NHS reduce training times for doctors? We'll be speaking to Dr Lawrence Gurlis, but we also want to hear your views, so get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll be back very soon.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Blustery March winds will blow heavy showers in across most of the UK through the rest of the day. There will be some brighter interludes because the showers will be moving through very quickly on this gusty wind. The winds are reaching gale force around some exposed western coasts and hills. But we've got a number of features circulating around low pressure. They will provide a focus for some of the heavier downpours. The showers especially frequent across northern and western parts of the UK. A better chance of some sunny spells coming through into the east of England, and some drier weather at times for northern Scotland as well. But it's going to feel a bit cold in that gusty wind. Temperatures above average for the time of year, 13 to 15 Celsius, but a degree or two lower compared with the last couple of days. Now, the showers merge to longer spells of rain across Northern Ireland into central and southern Scotland, northern and western England and Wales overnight. A few rumbles of thunder couldn't be ruled out, and for most it's a blustery night as well, with a lot of cloud in the sky. As a result, temperatures not falling very far, generally 3 to 7 Celsius. Now, by the end of the night, the area of low pressure responsible for these showers is moving into the North Sea. As that happens, we're going to see northerly winds bring colder air to the north of Scotland, and some sleet and snow showers affecting parts of Shetland and Orkney, perhaps the far north of the mainland. Otherwise, across the rest of the UK, it's a similar day to Friday. Sunny spells and heavy showers. Again, a few rumbles of thunder in some of the livelier downpours, especially in the east of England. 15 Celsius in the south, but well, things are going to turn colder across the UK as those northerly winds begin to arrive. That, at first, causes some icy patches on Saturday night in the far north. But further south, we've got a spell of wet weather moving in to bring some heavy rain across southwest and then southern parts of England through the start of Sunday. Then the colder air spreads south for all of us.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jules and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jules and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my common sense crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10:23. Now, chronic staff shortages for doctors could mean that training times may be slashed for doctors, according to the chairman of the NHS. The 15-year plan comes amid record shortages of NHS staff, with more than 130,000 vacancies across England.
Shortages have been exacerbated by walkouts from junior doctors, with more strikes planned through the month of April. Dr. Lawrence Gurlis joins us now. Lawrence, thank you very much for joining us. Let's just start with the junior doctors, if we might. What do you make of their announcement of four days of more strikes? Do you sympathise with them, or is it selfish and irresponsible?
A bit of both, Phil. Junior doctors are underpaid. Bear in mind, junior doctors can be anything from a 25-year-old to a 40-year-old. People who have big loans, £100,000 to qualify, and to pay a first-year junior doctor £14 an hour is not enough. It's not just about pay. The conditions of work, the lack of food, the having to pay for parking. They have a terrible, terrible pay package, having to move every 4 to 6 months to a different hospital. Having said that, I personally don't believe doctors should strike. I respect other doctors if they choose to strike, but let me say this to them and to you. If you choose to strike, you have to admit you're doing harm to patients. And that's what I want those doctors to face up to. You may not necessarily be killing people, but in the last strike, we saw 175,000 appointments and consultations and follow-ups and operations cancelled. That harms patients. And to have a 4-day strike just after the 4-day bank holiday weekend, when, bear in mind, all GPs will be closed, I think it's going to do great harm to patients. The decision is up to junior doctors. I do sympathise. I'm not keen on strikes. I think a 96-hour strike is excessive. at a time when the consultants who would normally be covering them have all planned their annual leave because it's during the school holidays. So it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible situation to be in, and I am disappointed that it's come to this.
And Lawrence, the figures are 250,000 appointments and operations could be cancelled or missed. So the doctors are doing this, demanding a 35% pay rise. So people are now saying, do we need doctors to have gone through a 7-year training, 5-year university, 2-year traineeship? Do we need that? Should we just change it now so then it won't have the debt they've got? It doesn't take all the training. Is that the way forward? Is this a good idea that the chairman of the NHS England have struck upon?
I think it is worth looking at, and I think we do need to look at the other idea of having more physician associates, that is, people who are not doctors but who can do 90 to 95% of the work of the doctors. I think that is where the answer is. Bear in mind, Esther, you talk about 5 years. I actually did a 6-year training. I did 1 year as a post-registration. That's now 2 years for doctors. But even to be a GP, you then have to do 3 years to train to be a GP. So you're talking about, 10, 11 years of training before you can become a GP? That surely sounds excessive. Having said that, you will know as a politician the law of unintended consequences. All of those doctors are, in fact, in the workforce. And actually what those trainee doctors are doing is providing cheap labour, both for hospitals and as GP registrars. And they're not sitting in libraries. So just trying to shorten the training may not make a difference. We need to be retaining doctors better, retention of staff. We've had the approach on the lifetime allowance we talked about last week, which has to be good. We need to retain more staff, improve the conditions of work. Some of the junior doctors, certainly the least well paid, need to be paid
Lawrence,
more.
What about
and we do need to look at the length of training and the use of physician associates.
What about apprenticeships starting this year then, Lawrence?
Well, I'm a great fan of apprenticeships and learning on the job. I was always disappointed that nurses training was taken out of the wards and that nurses now do a 3-year degree in a university before they even see a patient. I'm a great fan in apprenticeships. In other countries, in France, within 5 years, you're working as a doctor and you're working on the wards. And I think that we should be having more on-hands training, less theoretical, more practical. So, yes, I'm a great fan of that.
Dr. Lawrence Gerlis, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
I mean, Rebecca, what do you make of this idea of reducing the training time for doctors? I mean, Lawrence said that it was, all those years, 9, could be 10 years. It does seem excessive to a layman like me. But I guess lots of people would say, well, hold on a minute, surely it takes as long as it takes, and I want a properly trained doctor. I don't want somebody who's been, short-circuited through the system. Labour have said that they want to double the number of medical school places. Is that a more sensible approach, to just double the number of people going into training, or would you support shortening the training time?
I don't support shortening the training time at all. Because we're talking about human life, for goodness sakes. What's more valuable to anybody? So, no, I don't support shortening the training. Even when I look at the legal world, it takes 7 years to qualify as a solicitor. So decent careers do take time. They take a lot of effort. You've got to work hard at them. It is what it is. And the other problem for me is that, obviously, these strikes that are unfolding, they're saying, obviously, it's about pay, but it's a lot about the working conditions, and it's about, that patients are suffering and struggling and all the rest of it. So how on earth are they going to be better by training people less? It doesn't make sense to me.
I think France was less, David. He said France could do less times. There were 130,000 people short there. So is it not a good idea?
Well, to me, I'm not an expert in how you train medical staff.
You are scientifically trained.
That's absolutely true, but not a medic. I do work in the health sector a lot. And what I would say about the entire NHS, it's very difficult to just pick one set of people, whether they be junior doctors, whether they be senior nurses. What you can safely say is this: patients aren't happy with the service that they're getting, the taxpayer's not happy with the cost of it all, and the workforce isn't happy. I mean, that's absolutely obvious with all the strikes. There is clearly a big system failure. And I would say this about the junior doctors: they're assuming that the general public will be on their side. And I think that's a very big assumption they're making there. I think people are, frankly, fed up with a lot of what goes on in the NHS. That doesn't mean to say there aren't fantastic people in the NHS. I work with brilliant people, dedicated, hard-working people.
I think you're right. This
but it's a system failing. It's a system failing.
Within the NHS, it's not impressing me, and the junior doctors certainly aren't impressing me.
That's true.
Well, 35% is a lot to ask for, isn't it? A 35% pay rise is quite something.
But plenty more still to come on Friday morning with Esther and Phil, and obviously Dave and Rebecca are staying with us too. But now it's time for the latest news and headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Esther. It's 10:31, your top stories from the GB newsroom. A post-Brexit deal for Northern Ireland is being signed off this morning after MPs backed the Windsor framework. In a meeting chaired by the Foreign Secretary and European Commission, the UK and EU will formally adopt the plan, agreed following talks last month. MPs voted for the Stormont break on Wednesday, giving the Northern Ireland Assembly power to object to EU rules despite continued opposition from the DUP. Protesters are demonstrating outside Downing Street, where the Israeli Prime Minister is meeting Rishi Sunak. Benjamin Netanyahu's in London as thousands protest in Israel and here against a law that's been approved by his right-wing coalition. Critics say it's designed to shield him from his corruption trial. Talks at Downing Street are expected to focus on strengthening strategic ties between the two nations, as well as focusing on Iran's nuclear programme. Ofsted says school inspections will continue despite calls for them to be suspended. Unions representing teachers and heads want checks to be paused while a review's carried out. It's after head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life in January while waiting for a report which downgraded her school to the lowest possible rating. And the French government say it's ready to welcome King Charles to the country despite the ongoing protests. Earlier this week, Buckingham Palace cast doubt on the state visit because of the violent demonstrations taking place across France. Activists have been protesting for 9 days over government plans to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. TV online, DAB digital radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Now, coming up, following the Luz Casey report, we'll be asking, does policing in the UK need reform? So don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 10:36. Now, an official report this week led by Baroness Casey and commissioned by the Met Police has shown the force to be broken and rotten, suffering collapsing trust and guilty of institutional racism, misogyny and homophobia. Are we witnessing the fall of a historic British institution?
Rick Muir, Director of the Police Foundation think tank, and former Met Detective Peter Blexley join us now. Peter, if we can start with you. You know, you're a former Met Police detective. It can't be very pleasant to read what Louise Casey wrote about your former employers and where you used to work. Do you accept her findings that the Met Police is institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic? And did you witness that when you were a police officer at the Met?
Well, I view the Met from afar, so to speak, these days, but I'm a keen observer of policing, of course, as a professional commentator. And yes, I unequivocally accept every word that Baroness Casey said. The Met is clearly riddled from top to bottom with major issues that simply have to be rectified. Back in the day, and I'm talking about the late 70s and the early 80s, when I was a uniformed officer, I shamefully saw racism, was affected by it, became a part of it, and simply was too cowardly to stand up and speak out about it. What the Metropolitan Police is going to require now is braver police officers than me, better human beings than me, so that they stand up and challenge wrongdoing on each and every occasion they experience it.
What would happen, Peter, to a police officer who decided that they were going to stand up to some racism or misogyny or homophobia that they were experiencing? Would they be shunned by their colleagues? Is that the culture in the police force, that you don't sort of you say anything against your colleagues?
Well, it certainly was back in the day, but I'm not using that as an excuse. However, there have been problems in the past because the Metropolitan Police is institutionally protectionist of its reputation and its wrongdoing. Whistleblowers have been seen as rocking the boat, and many of them have had their careers curtailed, they've been moved sideways, they've been denied promotion opportunities, purely and simply because they broke the norm, they rocked the status quo, and they told supervisors about what they'd seen. The Met has to change that entirely, because Baroness Casey's unflinching and brilliant report was the iceberg into which the Metropolitan Police crashed this week, and it is now holed beneath the water. And so there needs to be enough hands on deck, enough truth tellers, in other words, to save this ship from sinking.
Rick, you heard what Peter said there, but I want to question the word institutional. So, yes, we've seen some horrific cases. Yes, those rotten police need to be removed. But institutional takes it to another level. That's saying you're getting rid of this sort of British institution.
Well, Esther, I think the word is deserved in this case. And, you know, if you read Baroness Casey's report, I think it's quite clear it is institutional. I mean, I agree very much with Peter's description of the situation, and I don't think it's changed very fundamentally. It's changed in some respects, but there's still very significant problems. And the reason it's institutional is for this reason, that there are racists, homophobes, misogynists within the police. But what happens then is that colleagues experience that discrimination in their day-to-day lives, and they can't report it, or they don't feel they can report it because they know nothing will be done about it. And that's why it's institutional. It's because it's not that most police officers are racist. It's there is a minority who are, but nobody tackles that minority, and there's a kind of culture of silence and just wanting to keep your mouth shut around it. And it's quite understandable people do keep their mouth shut because particularly if their senior officers don't back them up. And that's something which Baroness Casey highlighted again. So I think it is institutional, and it's going to take quite a lot of effort to change.
Rick, is this, do you think, particular to the Metropolitan Police? Or if Baroness Casey was to do a report into every police force in the country, do you think that there'd be a chance that she'd come out with exactly the same conclusions for each police force?
I think my judgment is very hard to know because we can't kind of quantify this, and obviously nobody's done the same thing in every police force. My sense is, from observing policing for quite a long time, is that things are probably worse in the Met than in very many police forces, but there are similar problems in other police forces, and this is not just confined to the Met. So I think that the Met is probably one of the worst culprits in terms of these questions. But I think you would find them in other forces as well, and it will vary. And, you know, some forces are very well run and have much more professional cultures than others. Some are pretty badly run. The Met historically has been a badly run police force. So, yeah, I think it's probably worse in the Met than elsewhere, but you'll find these issues in other forces as well.
So, Peter, coming back to you, how is this situation going to be solved? Are you talking that you would want to see, basically, the police dismantled, what we have at present dismantled, and start again?
Well, we need a very effective police service, a professional police service. Every man, woman and child in the country needs a professional police service. But the Met won't be resolved merely by top-down diktat. That is just manifestly doomed to fail. It's also got to be a bottom-up process. So those whistleblowers have to be embraced. They have to be regarded as truth-tellers, and their words need to be acted upon if the Met is truly going to root these bad people out. And there is clearly a significant number of them. But there's also a massive problem with the leadership of the Met Police. To climb that greasy pole of promotion, you have to kind of buy in to a neoliberal orthodoxy, which is spouted by those on high. And if you don't toe their line, then you won't get promoted. And sadly, many of those senior police officers in the Met will have seen this racism, this homophobia, this sexism and misogyny during their careers. And you can pretty much bet your bottom dollar they didn't call it out. So they remain part of the problem. And until this organisation unfailingly looks itself in the mirror and improves dramatically, then we, the public of London, are going to be failed.
Peter Blexley, former Met Police detective, and Rick Muir, director of the Police Foundation, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. David, I just wondered, who's to blame for this? Is it the senior police officers who are not doing enough to tackle it? Is it, as Peter suggested, rank-and-file police officers who see it and then don't challenge it? Is it the Police Federation that are too powerful and it makes it difficult to get rid of bad police officers? Where would you pin the blame, or all of the above?
I think all of the above, but also I would just like to say that what she also says is that it's institutionally corrupt. Now, you know, I don't know whether this is going to bring comfort to anybody, but as a, white, straight bloke, I've also had bad experiences with the Met Police. They literally let the whole community down. There are massive examples of police corruption. I personally think we should do a police service of Northern Ireland type thing. I think we should literally get rid of it. I think we need a discussion about, do we need a national gendarmerie police force? I think the whole notion of regional, not even regional, county police forces, they're obviously going to be backwaters. years. The Met has always been corrupt.
We had the Macpherson report 20-odd years ago. That's done nothing. We've now got this report.
Exactly.
We were looking at recruitment, we're looking at training, you're looking at the job itself. Rebecca, what do you think? Is it time to dismantle and start all over again if they can't reform themselves, is basically what Casey said?
Well, they can't reform themselves. They haven't done, as you say. This is not a new problem, is it? We've known about it for a very long time. You know, and in my opinion, and I'll say it as well, you know, I'm a white female and I've had problems with them. And the problem is the police don't operate from a human point of view. They operate from, this is what we say, this is what goes, and if you disagree with us, you're wrong. And that's why they don't consider the effects on humans and their lives and things like that. It has to start from the top and work its way down.
Rebecca, if you could stay with us, and David, if you could stay with us, we've got breaking news here. The state visit of King Charles to France will be postponed amid tensions over the pensions reform. We're joined on this breaking story by our royal reporter, Cameron Walker.
Hi, Esther. Yes, this has come through in a statement from the Elysee Palace in France, just confirmed in the last few moments. King Charles' state visit to France has been delayed after those trade unions called for another day of nationwide strikes and street protests during his stay. Of course, the King was meant to travel to France on Sunday and he was going to be in Paris and Bordeaux. But the images over the last couple of days, if you have seen, some of these protests have turned violent. The guidance we were getting from Buckingham Palace is they are keeping everything constantly under review. However, as of yet, we have had no confirmation or statement from Buckingham Palace on the news from the Elysee Palace. Of course, King Charles was due to attend a state's banquet, having been invited by French President Emmanuel Macron. Following this, his visit to France, the King and Queen consorts were due to travel to Germany. As far as we're aware, that is still taking place. But as I said, we have had no confirmation whatsoever of this news from Buckingham Palace. But of course, clearly this is going to be a big disappointment to the King and Queen consorts. It was due to be the King's first trip abroad as monarch. This state's visit, of course, sanctioned by the Foreign Office, meant to cement ties between France and the United Kingdom and, of course, Germany as well. But, yes, that statement coming through from the Elysee Palace, which reads, given the announcement yesterday of another day of national protests against the pension reform on Tuesday, King Charles's visit, initially scheduled for March the 26th to 29th, will be postponed. As soon as we have any more information from Buckingham Palace or sources in France, we'll bring it straight to you.
And Cameron, a wise decision there by the palace, but probably a wise decision by Macron as well. It probably seemed inappropriate what he was doing, inappropriate with the pensions and inappropriate with the views on royalty.
Yeah, many people were making the point that a lavish state's dinner for a foreign head of state perhaps won't go down too well with the French public, given the protests that are going on over the pensions. The Sun correspondent, actually, royal correspondent Matt Wilkinson, made the point yesterday that all the lots of French protests are clearly upset about the pension changes. However, the King and Queen consorts are both in their 70s and well above the pension age, and yet they are still coming to France to work, as well as many of the people who travel with them. But clearly this is going to be a big disappointment for the King and Queen consorts, but perhaps it would have been, if they did go to France, be a big distraction, these protests. Clearly, the royal household have to think about the King and Queen consorts' safety as well. A number of these engagements were perhaps meant to allow the King and Queen consorts to get up close and personal with members of the public. We have seen that since he's become king. In fact, he was very keen to shake people's hands, meet members of the public, being a personable monarch. But clearly, with these protests, and particularly as some of them have turned violent, perhaps it's thought that safety could be an issue there. So it did have the danger of overshadowing the tour. But as we have heard from the Elysee Palace in Paris, that has been postponed. The French part, at least, of the state visit has been postponed. Nothing from Buckingham Palace as of yet. If I do get anything, I'll let you know.
I know you certainly will, Cameron Walker. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come to you there, David. Maybe there's a bit of self-preservation in here from Charles and Camilla. They don't want this anti-royal sentiment contagion. You don't want to bring it back to the UK either.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, I do think it's... I thought it was a bit odd, actually, the way that... He's obviously been advised to go to France as the first place to go. I mean, it's not as if the Royal Household would make that decision, so he's been politically advised. I thought it was an odd choice to start with, especially with all these reforms, and so it's proved, I think it's probably wise that they pull it and, you know, just go somewhere a bit more straightforward as the, you know, don't run before you can walk.
Southend-on-Sea, that's where Charles should be getting to.
Rebecca, is the danger here for Macron, though, that the protesters have won? And that it just goes to show, I mean, I know they're quite militant in France at the best of times, but is this not a sign of weakness on his part, that in effect he's bowed down to these violent protesters?
Well, you know, potentially. I don't have a lot of good things to say about him. I don't have a lot of good things to say about France, so I'm probably not the best person to be asking about this.
We'll end it there, but I always think you've got to know which battles you can win and have the wisdom to pursue that. And this one, they were definitely not going to win. So I, like David was thinking, it was a strange choice and a bad choice.
Was it not strange that he forced it through Parliament, knowing this visit was coming up and knowing what the likely reaction was? It did seem to be sort of a lack of planning on the, you know, to do it. The timing of the pension announcement seems strange, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu touched down in London this morning to meet with Rishi Sunak at number 10 Downing Street. The meeting was expected to strengthen bilateral ties, especially in defence and intelligence.
Netanyahu's arrival has sparked fierce protests across London. Not just France, you know, they're happening in London too. Join us now is GBNews national reporter Paul Hawkins to tell us more. Are you in the middle of a massive protest there, Paul?
Yeah, there is a significant protest here. We think sort of 1,000 to 2,000 Israeli demonstrators here for the visit of Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been and gone from Downing Street. Significant security presence for his visit. And the reason why there were so many Israeli demonstrators, there are also Palestinian demonstrators over there. I guess you'd expect to see that kind of demonstration, but the reason why his visit is so controversial for many Israelis is because of the judicial reforms that he wants to bring in Israel, most notably giving ministers or giving the government more control over a committee that appoints judges, and also reducing the power of the Supreme Court so it would not have the power to strike down legislation. So there's been demonstrations here, there's been demonstrations in Rome and Berlin where Benjamin Netanyahu has also visited, and it has kind of overshadowed, that domestic policy has overshadowed his foreign policy initiative. But let's speak to one of the protesters now. We can talk to Jasmine, who's been hit. You're using your placard as a kind of umbrella, Jasmine.
Yeah, I'm not British at all. I'm Israeli. I'm not this train. Not for me.
Just tell us why you felt you had to be here this morning.
Because it's very important. It's about human rights. Our sisters and brothers in Israel, they're suffering a lot from this government. It was about to be a dictatorship. We need to save them. We need to help them. This country drove me away 8 years ago, and I want to come back. I want to go back.
And just to tell us a little bit about these changes that he wants to make to the courts in Israel as well. Is that another reason why you're here as well?
Yeah, so basically it's against women, against children, and against any other any other minorities in Israel. So it's just one sort of people who will benefit from it.
He says that the changes he wants to make to the courts, that's about rebalancing the constitution. What do you say to that?
First of all, we don't have a constitution, and second, he wants to rebalance the law system so he won't be eligible to go to jail. The whole changing of the law system is just for Bibi Netanyahu not going to jail. This is it.
He also says it's the will of the people because he was re-elected 4 months ago, and that this is what he said he would do, and so it's kind of what the people of Israel have asked for.
It's not democracy. He's stating it's the dictatorship of majority, and it's not true. Nobody voted for him to make Israel a dictatorship. Nobody did it. They voted for security, for lowering the taxes, for better life in Israel. No one's voted for it. It's not just left and right. His voters agree as well that this is not right and this shouldn't be. You want to elaborate on that?
You can show your sign.
Yes, I am showing my sign on this
and
note.
Jasmine, thanks for speaking to us. Really
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Rishi Sunak then, this is a 3-day visit by Benjamin Netanyahu. It's part of what they're calling a kind of friendship roadmap that the UK signed with Israel for closer bilateral ties heading up to 2030. But it's controversial. It doesn't include a two-state solution for Palestine, and that is why some people are saying the UK needs to distance itself from Israel. It's why Alicia Kearns, the Conservative chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, has questioned the wisdom of inviting Benjamin Netanyahu, given the controversial remarks by some of those within his coalition government, most notably from the far right and from ultra-religious groups. His finance minister recently saying that there was no such thing as Palestinian people. So there is some pressure on Rishi Sunak to put some distance between himself and Benjamin Netanyahu, but clearly he's not taking much notice of that given the visit today and for the next couple of days here in the UK.
Paul Hawkins, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It was unusual to see Palestinian and Israeli flags both in the protests together, wasn't it? You don't normally see that.
And I think it's that sort of global city that London is, and I guess the UK is, that every day there's some sort of protest outside number 10 Downing Street for people talking about the human rights for their part of the world. But that's it for the first hour of the show, but don't go anywhere. After this short break, we'll be speaking to a head teacher to discuss why many schools are calling for reform of Ofsted. They want the inspectors under inspection. What's your views? Don't go anywhere.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Jules and Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
News, and it's a busy show, as you can tell today.
We'll have the latest on the breaking news of King Charles' postponed visit to France.
And the school's watchdog Ofsted insists that inspections should continue despite calls for them to stop following the suicide of a head teacher. We'll be speaking to another head teacher to discuss why many schools are calling for reform.
New data out today shows retail sales have increased despite interest rates up, inflation up and food prices up. We've the latest with Laurie Laird on what's happening with the British economy.
And as ever, this morning we want to hear from you, so get involved with the show. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before that, here's your latest headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Good morning, it's 11:01. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. King Charles's first state visit to France has been postponed because of protests in the country. Tens of thousands of people have been demonstrating against the government's plan to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. The King was due to arrive in the country on Sunday as part of a 3-day trip to Europe. Downing Street says the decision was taken with the consent of all parties after the French president asked the British government to postpone the visit. It's understood new dates will be confirmed soon. A post-Brexit deal for Northern Ireland is being signed off this morning after MPs backed the Windsor framework. In a meeting chaired by the Foreign Secretary and European Commission, the UK and EU will formally adopt the plan agreed following talks last month. MPs voted for the Stormont break on Wednesday, giving the Northern Ireland Assembly power to object to EU rules. That's despite continued opposition from the DUP. James Cleverly told Maros Sefcovic he's grateful for his help.
This is not the corporate thanks of the British government, this is the personal thanks of me, James Cleverly, to you, Maros Sefcovic, for the commitment that you have put in, and of course the work that has been done by your wider team in getting us to what is a really good place that we are genuinely grateful.
I want to appreciate and pay respect to each and every one of you around the table, because you've been working tirelessly and in the spirit of what is possible and what we can do. While the people and businesses in Northern Ireland will now benefit from lasting certainty and predictability, the EU and UK can, and I'm convinced will, exploit the full potential of the trade and cooperation agreement.
Maros Sefcovic and James Cleverly speaking there. Protesters are demonstrating outside Downing Street, where the Israeli Prime Minister met with Rishi Sunak this morning. Benjamin Netanyahu's in London as thousands protest in Israel and here against a law that's been approved by his right-wing coalition. Critics say it's designed to shield him from his corruption trial. Talks at Downing Street are expected to focus on strengthening strategic ties between the two nations, as well as focusing on Iran's nuclear programme. Ofsted says school inspections will continue despite calls for them to be suspended. Unions representing teachers and heads want checks to be paused while a review's carried out. It's after head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life in January while waiting for a report which downgraded her school to the lowest possible rating. The Ofsted chief says stopping inspections wouldn't be in the best interests of children. The Shadow Health Secretary says he's concerned about the upcoming junior doctors' strike. Wes Streeting's calling on the government to resolve the pay dispute ahead of next month's industrial action. The British Medical Association, which is asking for a 35% pay rise, says no credible offer was made during talks on Wednesday. The union announced members will walk out for 4 days from April the 11th.
I'm really worried about these junior doctors' strikes, and I'm worried that unless people at that stage in their career have great specialist roles to move into once they've finished their junior doctor phase of their career, we're going to lose people to countries like Australia, to Canada, where aggressive recruitment of UK doctors is already underway. So I hope the government can resolve the junior doctors' strikes amicably.
A Premier League footballer is being investigated for a third sexual offence. The 29-year-old, who's not been named, was first arrested in July last year over allegations of rape. He was further arrested while in custody following claims he raped another woman in 2021. The Met Police says the man was interviewed last month under caution for a third offence, alleged to have taken place in February last year. The footballer denies the allegations and his bail has been extended. There was a larger than expected pickup in retail sales last month, with trade returning to its pre-pandemic levels. The Office for National Statistics reported a 1.2% increase in February compared to the previous month. Experts had predicted a rise of just 0.2%. The ONS says the broader picture for retail, though, remains subdued, with little real growth over the last 18 months because of the cost of living crisis. And ever fancied walking in the footsteps of the King? Well, now you can, as long as you promise to take your shoes off. For the first time in living memory, visitors will be allowed to stand in the exact spot where King Charles will be crowned inside Westminster Abbey on May the 6th. Specially guided tours will include access to the medieval mosaic, the Cosmati pavement. You'll have to wear socks, though. No bare feet will be allowed to protect the 13th century flooring. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Now we're joined throughout the show today by Deputy Leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane, and Chairman of Lodestone Communications, David Wild. So let's go back to that breaking story there.
If you want to follow in the footsteps of King Charles, you won't be going to France, will you?
That's one thing you're not doing today. But that is the breaking story there, that Charles has announced that they won't be going over to France. And here's the Royal Communications, the update there, the King and Queen Consort state visit to France. From Buckingham Palace, the King and Queen Consort's visit has been postponed. The Majesties greatly look forward to the opportunity to visit France as soon as dates can be found.
And just to reiterate what Rhiannon said during the news, the government said the King and Queen Consort state visit to France has been postponed. The decision was taken with the consent of all parties after the President of France asked the British government to postpone the visit. And the visit to Germany, which was planned afterwards, will still go ahead. But I think that's the key bit, that it was the President of France asked the British government to postpone the visit. David, how embarrassing do you think this is for President Macron, having to go and say, you know, you're going to have to... Can you cancel the visit, please? We've got people rioting on the streets in Paris.
Well, you'd say pretty embarrassing. I mean, you know, you wouldn't want it to happen. If it was the other way around, the tabloids would obviously be savaging the British government. And I think you know, Esther's point earlier about how is there going to be any sort of contagion from what you might call anti-royalist, you know, views in France. I mean, I do think the monarchy needs to back away from the cult of celebrity. I think they've got themselves into a terrible pickle, and that if they're not careful, if all they become is just, you know, celebrities, then I think they're going to have a serious problem going forward.
And it has seemed like that. It seems that Kate, Princess of Wales, has gone into overdrive, and this is to balance up the Meghan Harry situation. We pick up the paper now and she's everywhere. Do they need to row back, become dignified, become royal again?
Yeah, I mean, I am a royalist. I love the royals, but I do think that they've gone too far down the route of celebrity, but also down the route of politics. You know, King Charles is very much, you know, he's quite outspoken with what he thinks. It's not his job. Like, that is not his job. You're never going to win in politics. You're never going to be loved by everybody. And your job is to be loved by everybody and be a peacemaker. So calm it down with the politics and get back to doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and talking about that, I mean, it was only last week with this situation in France about the pensions increasing the age from 62 to 65, we were talking about, was this the end of Macron politically, the fall of his government? So he is on shaky ground. Does it really reflect his instability at home?
Well, I think the whole thing's completely unstable. The way Macron came to power, formed his own political party, the post-war political parties, the Gaullists and the Socialists, they've essentially, you know, completely disappeared. It is a very strange situation in France. I mean, and, you know, when I heard that the pensions were going up from 62 to 65, I thought, I'm not going to get my pension. You know, I'm not going to get mine till I'm 67. Yeah. So, you know, it does seem to be a bit sort of behind the times there. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, I think it's incredibly embarrassing. These kind of big top-level state interactions, they're meant to be dignified. And that's the point of them, actually.
But it's probably a coup for Germany that now that the state visit to Germany is going ahead as planned. So obviously,
given the fact that Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, it was probably better that way around anyway.
Well, you know, they're now the first place that King Charles will visit. So they'll probably be delighted about this.
Yeah. I think David's got a point there, though. Who are advising the royal family at the moment? Surely, as you look into the years ahead, it's a family that's got to live from generation to generation, important time. You would have been picking a far more stable and accepting
this is the government
country.
who decide these things, isn't it? It's the government, it's the Foreign Office who tell them where they should be going.
But surely there is negotiation between the palace as well. Are you saying the government got it incredibly wrong?
Well, whether it's right or wrong, it would be the government who decided they were going to France to start with. Probably the government didn't predict that there was going to be these riots, did they? They weren't to know that when they planned the visit.
Well, I mean, it is a bit. I thought it was strange that it was France first, given the fact that they are our traditional enemy. And
certainly Rebecca's enemy.
Well, absolutely. But I mean, I like France. I go to France a lot. But it did seem an odd one. You'd have thought you'd have gone for something, and it's also very political with the Windsor framework.
Well, maybe that was the problem. It was all too political. Was this a thank you back for Macron saying, you know, we'll have more police on the beaches, we'll stop the boats coming over?
Yes.
Was it way too political? And is this not a big message to the royal family now? Take out the politics, as Rebecca said, and go back to what you should be doing, which is diplomacy.
Coincidental, isn't it, that they've arranged a state visit for the point in time where we've just given them nearly £500 million. So it's all about politics. That's what it's all coming down to. Stop it. You're royalty. Get on with your job, please. France are not the people...
Well, the British government are always going to use the royal family to pursue their diplomatic objectives, aren't they? I mean, they're such a big draw.
They are, but why do we keep on focusing on France? For goodness sakes, they've been failing at the job of immigration, helping us with the job of immigration with the money we've been giving them for years. So what are we trying to do? It's not going to work. We need to sort ourselves out.
Well, we will keep you up to speed with this story. As I said, breaking story today that the King and Queen's visit to France, the state visit, has been delayed.
Now, stopping inspections would not be in the best interest of children. That's according to the head of the schools watchdog, following calls for them to be paused after the death of head teacher Ruth Perry.
Ofsted Chief Inspector Amanda Spearman acknowledged the debate about reforming inspections to remove grades is a legitimate one, but insisted school checks aim to raise standards and should continue.
3 unions representing teachers and heads have urged Ofsted to pause inspections this week, and Reading Borough Council also called for a pause while a review is carried out into the system.
Chris McGovern, the chairman of the Campaign for Real Education, and head teacher Sophie Greenaway joins ours now. So if I go to you, Chris, first, don't the inspectors need inspecting? Doesn't Ofsted need to have a good look at it? Is it performing the job it was set up to do?
Well, we know it's not performing the job it was set up to do. Ofsted itself is inadequate. We're about 3 years behind by the age of 15 compared to the best education systems in the world. Ofsted was put in 25 years ago. I advised John Major at the time to improve standards. So if there's any rating of inadequacy around, it should go to Ofsted. But look, we're talking about a terrible tragedy, an unspeakable tragedy here. I've worked as an Ofsted inspector. I've also worked as a head teacher. I've been at both ends of this. broadly speaking, I'm in favour of inspections, and I think the Chief Inspector is probably right to say inspections have to continue, because ultimately what Ofsted should be doing is looking after the interests of children. And yes, they've got to look at this single word they're using to classify schools. It can be outstanding or it can be inadequate or something in between, but one word cannot possibly summarise the achievement of a school. So that's got to be looked at. There needs to be a review of that. But in the meantime, Ofsted has to go on, but it needs to be reviewing itself. And we can't have any more of this enormous pressure which has possibly driven a head teacher to suicide. But it is a high pressure system. But, you know, many schools will broadcast on their notice boards and outside the school quotations from Ofsted. They're very proud of Ofsted, that Ofsted have given them a good rating. So it works both ways. Ofsted should be a force for good. It certainly should be a force for helping children. We've had a terrible tragedy, but terrible tragedies can make bad law.
Sophie, I just wondered from a teacher's perspective, I mean, are schools using this tragic event as a Trojan horse to try and avoid inspections?
Absolutely not. I knew Ruth personally, and what I think this has done, this awful situation, is it's opened the floodgates to feelings that are out there in schools, in school leaders, and how they've been feeling, the fear that's been instilled by these Ofsted inspections for years. Finally, there seems to be an opportunity to speak about what that's really like for us. And it's not a Trojan horse, it's an opportunity, because Ruth's death cannot be in vain. Ruth's death has got to lead to change. It can't just be that Ofsted say, oh, we'll have a think about the single word judgment, or that might be a good idea. That's brilliant. Yes, we would love conversations about that. That needs to happen. But that can't be the only thing. And sympathy for the family is not the only thing. They want change, and so do we. So it's and putting children at the centre of everything, which is what Ofsted have said, which is why they won't pause their inspections. That doesn't make sense to me. The government are putting a huge amount of money into mental health and wellbeing. I am a senior mental health lead I've been trained and paid for by the government, yet they're not looking out for the mental health and the mental health and wellbeing of its school leaders. And we're the ones that are teaching their children. And it's like in an aeroplane, when the oxygen mask comes down, you have to put yours on first, then you can look after children. It's when it's not being looked at the right way round. There needs to be a pause, there needs to be a risk assessment, there needs to be a review of the framework in its current format, and there needs to be some change.
What about the point that Chris alluded to when he sort of said, well, you know, look, if schools get a good Ofsted report, they're the ones who make a big song and dance about it. They'll probably write out to the parents or put it up on the notice board and all the rest of it. And so that when people say too much emphasis is given to the Ofsted report, schools may be partly guilty in helping to perpetuate that.
I think it's because there is this fear instilled by the word Ofsted, and I think it's something that parents think that's the be-all and end-all of a school, this single word judgment, and that is what they use to pick a school. However, that is not right, and when I picked schools for my own 3 children, I went and visited 2 schools. I went and visited, in those days it was called Satisfactory and an outstanding school. The Satisfactory school was the one that I picked for my children because the feel of the school, I knew it would meet the needs of my children and it was the right school for them. Parents they don't need that single word judgment. Schools don't need it either. And schools don't need the words that Ofsted say about them to define them. We know what we're doing well. We self-assess ourselves all the time. We know what we need to
Sophie,
work
can I
on
ask
to become even better.
Can I ask you how you would like the inspections to go ahead? Because I'm somebody who, I've written an article today, I do think change needs to come about, but I do believe in inspections to make sure we keep standards high or improve them and let parents have a choice. So how would that go ahead going forward? Not just a pause, but how are we going to do the inspections?
No, a pause and reflection and a risk assessment, but we want changes to the Ofsted framework. We absolutely believe there needs to be quality assurance. There needs to be inspections. That's not what we're saying. That's not what school leaders are saying. It's that there needs to be a change in those processes and how they're done. For example, taking out safeguarding from the inspection, do it annually, do an audit annually, work with us and help us to ensure that schools are growing and developing, because that's what we want.
So would you like it just on academic qualifications then? If you take the safeguarding out, should you just have it, look, these are the grades, this is what you're going to get, and you see the safeguarding separately?
Safeguarding separately, and then you look at the school and you don't have a single word judgment, and you have a series of statements about what the school needs to develop and work on further, and how Ofsted are going to help do that, and the support plan in place, and areas of real success to celebrate. That's what needs to happen. It doesn't need one word.
Chris, I mean, do you not think Sophie's got a good point in terms of the fact that, you know, when people speak about the schools in their local community, they tend to know which are the good schools and which are the bad schools, and they don't tend to read an Ofsted report to tell them. Parents are a bit more sophisticated
and they might
on that.
not have too much of a choice where the child
well,
goes
that's
either.
a different issue. But is too much emphasis placed on a two-day inspection of a school once every 4 years?
Yeah, certainly estate agents put it in their adverts, don't they? What I would say, you know, and it's quite important to say this with regard to the mental health of teachers, which is a very important issue, but less important probably than the mental health of the children. Over 80%, I think about 83% of schools are ranked good or outstanding by Ofsted. So you could say in many respects Ofsted have been quite kind, because actually internationally our school system isn't doing particularly well. So it's very easy, because we have such a tragic case, to be overcritical of Ofsted. Many Ofsted inspectors have got experience in schools themselves, most have. They're trying to do the best they can for the children. If you go back to the days before Ofsted, there was still inspections by Her Majesty's inspectors, but could be every 25, 30 years. Now there should be inspections every 4 years. In the particular case we're talking about, the school where the teacher sadly took her own life, the school hadn't been inspected for 13 years because it was rated as outstanding. Now that's a failing of Ofsted. They should still be inspecting schools, even if they are ranked outstanding, not leave a 13-year gap, because that head teacher could have received feedback from Ofsted if there were 4-year regular inspections. So Ofsted is a very fallible organisation. It's got a lot of things to be accountable for and to. It's not very successful, but we do need it.
Chris McGovern, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and also Sophie Greenaway. Thank you.
Now, coming up, as interest rates are at a 14-year high after inflation jumped to 10.4% in February, we'll be talking to economist Laurie Laird. But of course, we still want to hear your views, GB Views at gbnews.uk.
And we've got a load to read out.
We will be reading some out when we're back, which will be very soon.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Blustery March winds will blow heavy showers in across most of the UK through the rest of the day. There will be some brighter interludes because the showers will be moving through very quickly on this gusty wind. The winds are reaching gale force around some exposed western coasts and hills. Well, we've got a number of features circulating around low pressure. They will provide a focus for some of the heavier downpours. The showers especially frequent across northern and western parts of the UK. A better chance of some sunny spells coming through into the east of England, and some drier weather at times for northern Scotland as well. But it's going to feel a bit cold in that gusty wind. Temperatures above average for the time of year, 13 to 15 Celsius, but a degree or two lower compared with the last couple of days. Now, the showers merge to longer spells of rain across Northern Ireland into central and southern Scotland, northern and western England and Wales overnight. A few rumbles of thunder couldn't be ruled out, and for most it's a blustery night as well, with a lot of cloud in the sky. As a result, temperatures not falling very far, generally 3 to 7 Celsius. Now, by the end of the night, the area of low pressure responsible for these showers is moving into the North Sea. As that happens, we're going to see northerly winds bring colder air to the north of Scotland, and some sleet and snow showers affecting parts of Shetland and Orkney, perhaps the far north of the mainland. Otherwise, across the rest of the UK, it's a similar day to Friday. Sunny spells and heavy showers. Again, a few rumbles of thunder in some of the livelier downpours, especially in the east of England. 15 Celsius in the south, but well, things are going to turn colder across the UK as those northerly winds begin to arrive. That, at first, causes some icy patches on Saturday night in the far north. But further south, we've got a spell of wet weather moving in to bring some heavy rain across southwest and then southern parts of England through the start of Sunday. Then the colder air spreads south for all of us.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jules and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jules and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 11:27. Lots of views coming in, particularly about the junior doctors' strike. Actually, quite a lot of sympathy for the junior doctors.
I was going to say, it's mixed views coming in. We've got Alison here saying doctors shouldn't be allowed to strike. You should be paid for the job you are doing and not because of your age.
But Jeff says, I think the doctors earn and deserve every penny. Tony says it's ridiculous that junior doctors in England are coming out with £100,000 of student debt and they're expected to work long, unsociable hours for around £32,000 a year. Those in London, after tax, student debt and rent has been paid, are left with very little.
And Sharon, remember, junior doctors work excessive hours, and this was always the case historically because their rewards would come later on. David, are you surprised there was so much support there, in a way, for doctors' views, doctors' strikes?
I think the junior doctors, out of all, I mean, I think 35% is obviously, you know, shall we say, a starting
point.
It's a good starting point. As an ex-trade union negotiator, I'd say that's a very...
So as an ex-trade union negotiator, would you have said to your doctors, do you know what, you're going way too high there? What would you have said? How would you be negotiating with them down? Do you think they're childish, militant?
I personally think, I think going for something that high when you're obviously going to have to settle for something a lot less, I personally would make it a bit more realistic. But, you know, I'm not here to advise the junior doctors on the pay claim. To me, it's one of these sort of situations where there is public support for the junior doctors, but like I said before, they need to be very careful with it because people's views about the NHS are very complicated, and people have, you know, there are some brilliant people in the NHS, you can have very good experiences, but let's be honest, try getting a GP in central London these days, right? So everybody knows.
And I had figures here, nearly half of all hospital consultants now in England and Wales are born outside the UK, and 2 in 5 GPs are born outside the UK. We've got a problem, haven't we, on the recruitment, the retention and the training.
Are you surprised at the level of support amongst our viewers for the junior doctors? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, I am really. Because the 35% is just so ridiculous. You know, and it's every man and his dog's currently striking and wanting 35% and 18%, and it's like, where on earth are we
Maybe
expected
they're
to find all
supporting
of
them
this?
because that might help their
I
case
agree.
for 35%.
Because I think...
Right.
I mean, just quickly, David, because you're is asking for 35% not giving the government an easy get-out-of-jail card? Because they say, well, we can't possibly give in to that, whereas if they ask for something more realistic, there probably would be more pressure on the government.
Yeah, that personally would be my view, right? That I think the junior doctors, out of all the sections of the workforce, probably have got a reasonable case. But like I said before, the NHS, it's a system failure. Talking about the junior doctors, away from the senior doctors, away from the nurses, and like you said, it's not as if we're not relying on the rest of the world to provide us with the workforce of the NHS. We are. And we're not honest about the NHS in its totality.
Well, thanks for those views. We've got more views and keep them coming in. But coming up, we'll be speaking to economist Laurie Laird. But first, here's the latest headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Good morning, it's 11:31. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The first state visit of King Charles to France has been postponed because of protests across the country. Tens of thousands of people have been demonstrating against the government's plan to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. The King was due to arrive on Sunday as part of a 3-day trip to Europe. Buckingham Palace says the royal couple is looking forward to visiting France as soon as a new date has been found. It's understood the Windsor framework has now been formally adopted by the UK and EU at a meeting between the Foreign Secretary and European Commission, Maros Sefcovic. MPs voted for the Stormont break on Wednesday, giving the Northern Ireland Assembly power to object to EU rules, despite continued opposition from the DUP. Protesters have been demonstrating outside Downing Street, where the Israeli Prime Minister met Rishi Sunak earlier. Benjamin Netanyahu is in London as thousands rally in Israel and here against a law that's been approved by his right-wing coalition. Critics say it's designed to shield him from his corruption trial. Talks at Downing Street were expected to focus on strengthening strategic ties between the two nations, as well as on Iran's nuclear programme. And Ofsted says school inspections will continue despite calls for them to be suspended. Unions representing teachers and heads want checks to be paused while a review is carried out. It's after head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life in January while waiting for a report which downgraded her school to the lowest possible rating. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks ever so much for that, Rhiannon. Now, the inflation rate has risen to 10.4% thanks to soaring food prices across the country. According to the ONS, food prices are now at a 45-year record high, piling pressure on households.
Yeah, the price increases can be blamed in part on supply chain shortages, particularly for fruits and vegetables. Well, the economic analyst Laurie Laird joins us now. So, Laurie, it seems a very complicated picture at the moment. People are still wanting to go out and buy, so we've got a buoyancy there, but we've got pain, haven't we? Cost of living, we've got mortgages going up, we've got inflation. So how do you square that circle?
It's a very complicated picture, and if it makes you feel any better, looking at the bank...
Please make me feel better.
Well, the Bank of England met yesterday. They raised interest rates, but...
That didn't make me feel any better.
Stay with me. Stay with me. They also said that rates may not rise much more, but when you go through the minutes of the Bank of England's meeting, they seem as confused as the rest of us. They're saying inflation is very high, 10%
10.4%, as you said, 18% on food. That's very, very high. That's 5 times where they're supposed to put the inflation rate. Yet they're saying we might not raise rates anymore. They seem as confused as the rest of us. Does that make you feel any better at all?
So what I will say there, because in my patch of the world, there's a lot of food manufacturers, producers and growers, and they had said to me for a long, long time, so I say the Bank of England aren't really listening and the economists, they said they have absorbed all of this inflation for a long, long time, whether it was the cost of wheat, whether it was the cost of energy, whether it was the cost of fuel and staff. And they have been taking all that pressure. And they said they should have known that this was going to come through because the inflation they were absorbing, and it had to be passed on to the customer at one time or another.
I don't want to go too much down the road of bank bashing, but Andrew Bailey, the head of the Bank of England, spoke earlier and said, kind of warned companies not to raise their prices. Now, remember, supermarkets are on wafer-thin margins. Remember, Andrew Bailey not long ago said we shouldn't ask for raises because that could become inflationary. So he's a bit of a tin ear when it comes to this thing. I can tell you that food prices are probably going to start to fall. There's an energy element to food prices. The fertilizer is energy intensive, transporting it is energy intensive. So when energy prices have fallen, if we look at a year-on-year basis, remember everything went very, very high after the start of the war last year, that will start to drop out of comparison. So arithmetically, food price inflation will start to fall. That doesn't mean it doesn't feel quite painful for a lot of us.
So, I mean, obviously one of Rishi Sunak's big promises was to halve inflation this year, which everyone took as it was an inevitability, it was going to happen, and therefore it was an easy pledge to...
They all said what an easy pledge to make at the time, didn't they?
So does this surprise increase in inflation mean that all bets are off now?
It makes it a lot harder. And it was a weird pledge to make because reducing inflation isn't necessarily in the government's gift. I mean, they can constrain spending a little bit, but that's pretty much all that they can do. He was basing that on existing inflation forecasts.
Was he basing it on the fact that he's also a financier and he thought, well, I know this market better than anywhere else?
Nobody has forecast inflation very well over, not just this bout, but when inflation was very, very low a couple of years. It hasn't been that long that inflation was below target. The Bank of England private forecasters didn't see that either. That was a bit of a risky move.
David, you're nodding your head in agreement here.
Well, I just think the Bank of England, the extended quantitative easing over very many years, that went on too long. The argument could be that they didn't raise interest rates soon enough. The forecasting has been all over the shop. I mean, politically, it's a very easy point to make against Rishi Sunak. You know, the medicine isn't working. Just look at this number. Now, I mean, obviously it's too soon to say and all of that, but it's a good political point to make. So I do think he's under real political pressure after making that pledge.
I mean, Rebecca, obviously with the increase in interest rates, which presumably went up partly because inflation had gone up the day before, I mean, it seems to me that that's just going to make the economic outlook for the country even harder in terms of economic growth. From a UKIP perspective, what would you like to see the government do on the economy to try and get it going?
Oh, my goodness, what a big question that is.
That's why we ask them the big questions on GB News.
How long have we got? Flipping heck. Well, I mean, there's a lot of investment that is needed and actually looking at the growth strategy, but obviously when Liz Truss kind of came out with all of that stuff, that didn't help us either. Unfortunately, Rishi, I do believe, has got it entirely wrong. You would like to think that he'd be the person to have it within his hands and his capability, but I don't think that he has, and I don't think that anybody particularly has. But what I know now is that people are obviously, they are struggling far too much and we have to do something quick.
So, Laurie, looking at the growth, the question Philip put there, how would we look now to get growth?
A couple of things that need to be done. One is planning. And this is the one thing that I think Liz Truss got right. It has to be easier in this country. You want to attract investment, right? Investment creates jobs, it creates research and development, it creates progress. People cannot invest where they want to work and live. Planning is far too tight. There could be a lot more investment in training. We have a mismatch of people's skills and where we have job openings. The other thing that's key is that we just had a budget. everything was on a 3-year term. So one of the things that was rather smart in this budget was Jeremy Hunt's being able to write off investment against your profits. But that's for 3 years. People invest on a longer term.
Most people would say the corporation tax, that going up was the big determinant against
the problem
investment.
with corporation tax, the level isn't nearly as important as stability. People want to invest where they think the tax rate is going to be steady. They can make long-term plans. People don't invest on
We might disagree on that. I think level as well as stability, but I totally agree with your point on stability.
I mean, just finally, Laurie, given that the Federal Reserve increased their interest rates, did the Bank of England have any choice but to increase?
No, it didn't. I think
because it would have just damaged the value of the pound if they...
Absolutely. Sterling could have fallen. The Bank of England is, sort of between a rock and a hard place, but I am absolutely shocked that both the Fed and the Bank of England hinted that this could be the last interest rate rise when we have inflation at 10%. This doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Laurie Laird, thank you very much indeed. David Wilde, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. And Rebecca Jane, as always, thank you very much indeed for your time. You're watching Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Coming up shortly, we'll have the latest on King Charles's postponed visit to France. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back very soon.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 11:43. Now, the state visit of King Charles to France has been postponed amid tensions over President Macron's pension reforms.
And in other royal news, Prince Harry is directing his charitable focus towards the Global Boyhood Initiative, whatever that's all about, which I believe seeks to make boys less toxic. Again, what's that all about? Why are boys toxic? Anyway, the royal commentator, Angela Levin, joins us now. But let's go back to that breaking news, Angela, about this state visit being delayed.
I think the important thing that it was President Macron who told them not to come. It would have seemed very rude, and people would have absolutely gasped if we'd said, or the palace had said, they didn't feel it was safe to go. The fact that he says that means he's actually taking a lot of care, that he's not putting them in a dangerous situation. What is interesting, actually, is that the whole thing is over the French having their time from, they have to work from 62 years to 64 years before they can retire. Where here in the UK, it's gone up to 68. Has anyone said a murmur? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. But before I came here, I'd read that there won't be any red flags for them. There wouldn't be any red carpets for them. For the people who put it on are actually decided to go on strike. So the whole thing looked absolutely ridiculous.
So the royal family wouldn't have had any red carpets because they were all on strike.
Well, you don't think
so it wouldn't have looked very good, would it? The whole thing would have been a mess.
Not a single flag round. It would have been very.
So Macron's hand was forced, really, by the protest, by the demonstration.
By the protest. Yeah. Yes,
I'm sure. I presume that the King and Queen are probably quite relieved, though, aren't they? Because it would have been quite an awkward position for them to be in and go into France with all those.
It could be dangerous because Versailles, where they were going to have this huge banquet, you know, the French hate that. They hate the royals. I mean, they're not a royal nation, really. And, you know, in the mid-70s that they had this revolution, and they see that that's the place of the revolution and aristocrats and too much money. And so to have the banquet there probably wasn't a good idea.
Was it a big mistake by Macron, really, the whole thing?
Well, I don't think it's a big mistake that he puts up the retirement date by 2 years.
No, I meant this visit for them to go to Versailles knowing what the French public
thinks. Yes, I think
thinks.
Versailles they could have avoided. They could have gone to somewhere differently. You know, they could have gone to, you know, some place. There's lots of places where they could have gone for dinner. I can't recommend them. I haven't been there for a long time. But it's just very important that we realise that it came from Macron. It didn't come from the UK. People can't attack us for not going. He says it's, you know, not wise to come, and we just have to listen. They will be going to Germany, though.
Yes.
They will be going to
Germany. Can I read out what some of our viewers have said? Sean here says, good, I'm glad our monarchs are staying away. Not an appropriate time, considering all that's going on.
Harvey, though, says, that's a shame. I was looking forward to seeing the pictures of the visit. I think we all were, to be honest, Harvey, with all that carnage going on in France at the same time.
Yeah, Margot, I'm sure that was a wise decision. They do have a few issues going on in France.
And Jeanette says, in my opinion, the postponement is a relief. But Lorraine says he should definitely go. So, but of course, it's like you say, Macron who's called it off, and so the King can't go.
I think what the French should actually think about is that, you know, the King is 74, Camilla is 75. They're working day and night for the country, and that people sort of getting grumpy because they have to stay another 2 years is absolutely pathetic.
Would it not have been a good message for Macron to show the King and Queen? They're saying, look, he's 74, he's they're working, and you know.
That's why I'm telling you, you know, we're not, you know, what's wrong with actually working when things are difficult for the country?
Do you think we're seeing too much of the royal family?
Never.
At the moment, because people would say you've got the King and the Queen, but Kate, are we not seeing too much of her? Has she got too much exposure? Are we seeing her more as a sort of some sort of showbiz rather than royalty? Is she competing with Meghan?
Not at all. She's working hard because there are not so many people doing it. Harry and Meghan and Prince Andrew have all left, so they've got loads to do. They want to keep up. They can't do all the contracts. But I think it's very wrong to call them that celebrities, because they go to occasions, they go to places, engagements of charities and things, and there's crowds and crowds of people there cheering them. That's not their fault.
But somebody who is a celebrity is Harry now, isn't it? Harry and Meghan.
It's Harry and Meghan are doing that. They're not members of the royal family.
What's this though about making boys less toxic?
Global Boyhood.
Well, yes, I've got it. Global Boyhood Initiative, who say that gender is not tied to sexual organs. Now, in my world, it's exactly the opposite. They are tied to sexual organs.
He's joining in on the sort of trans issue here, is he? Is that
No,
what
it
he's
just
doing?
means that it's all. Everyone's got to be neutral. Everyone's got to be, you know, the same as everybody else. Now, I find that very odd that Meghan's let that go ahead, because she's a huge feminist. And why does she want to come down a few steps to be very similar to Harry? I mean, he's a shadow of himself now, and he is very weak, and perhaps he thinks that that's very feminine and rather nice.
So maybe
he can
this
boss him around.
oscillating and fluid, was he relating it to him? He was saying you don't need the masculinity. I found tears and meditation. Is it all about him? Is it all about Harry being absorbed with Harry?
But he was a real military guy. He was very much a guy's guy. Why does she go for somebody like that and then try and emasculate them? It doesn't make any sense
she's
to me.
successfully done it, hasn't she?
Well, she has successfully done it. But look what he looks like. Look what he's, you know, he's anxious, he's depressed, you know, he's taking drugs, which he tells the world, you know,
might lose
he might not get back in America.
Yes. Esther always thinks she can change me, Angela. She always thinks that she can...
I'd never want to change you, Philip. You're perfect just the way you are.
But it's nonsense. It's nonsense.
Angela, stay with us, because we've also got Sarah Robertson here with us to take a look at the big showbiz stories. But you were going to talk about Snoop Dogg.
That's right.
Because he's a big royal fan.
Yes, he is a big royal fan. That actually segues very nicely into what I was going to say. So Snoop Dogg calls the late Queen Lizzie, and he adores our royal family.
Hang on. We better ask with Angela.
If that's okay.
Is that disrespectful?
Well, she's passed, so she, you know, that's
all right,
his excuse.
But there was that over-familiarity, or was it said with love?
Their child Lilibet, that's what I
agree with you, Angela. That's disgraceful. It was disgraceful that Meghan did that, but we know why she did it. Ruffle a few royal feathers, to ruffle some royal feathers, I think. But going back to Snoop Dogg, so Snoop Dogg, big American US rapper, he wants to be in Coronation Street, but he also wants to play for King Charles's coronation. He has offered his services for the King's coronation in May. It's been turned down by Harry Styles, Adele. I think Elton's also turned it down as well. But Snoop says he'll come to the rescue as a thank you, because he says the late Queen pardoned him and allowed him to be able to come into the country so he could play, because Prince William and Harry, when they were younger, were huge fans of his
why are people turning
music.
it down?
I'm a big fan as well.
I thought everyone would have been...
Because they say it's to do with Harry and Meghan, and I think a lot of younger pop acts don't want to be associated with King Charles.
But
it's all to do with trends and fashion film.
Months ahead, you know, like the royals, celebrities are booked up months ahead.
I agree. But I think it's to do with image with a lot of them. They don't want to be associated.
Woke rather than traditional. But I'm loving that Snoop Dogg is quite happy to be involved.
Yes, and I'd rather Snoop came on. I think the young people would love that. Yeah. He'd show them all, and he's American, and he doesn't seem to have a problem with the royals the way that the French do.
How's his Lancashire accent for a place in part
He
in
wants to be in the
Coronation
Rovers.
Street?
So apparently he's a massive fan of Coronation Street, watches it, is addicted to it, and has begged the Coronation Street bosses if he can get behind the Rovers and pull some pints. He wants a part written. I mean, that would be fantastic for the soap if they got him on. It would be hilarious.
I'm loving that he's begging for work. Royalty, I'll be there for you.
Yes.
Coronation Street, I'll be there for you. But something that's been cancelled.
Yes, that is Top Gear. So Top Gear fans, very sorry to say this, the BBC have had to pull the rest of Series 34 because of Freddie Flintoff, the presenter's terrible crash. He had that awful crash in December last year while filming. It was a three-wheel open Morgan super sports car he was driving. Obviously ran over. He's still got very bad injuries from that, and he's apparently very emotionally distressed. The BBC have said that they're helping Freddie with his recovery, but they've said they've got to axe the show.
Is that a permanent axing of the show?
Well, they've just said they've cancelled this series. They're not going to continue filming it out of a mark of respect until he's recovered, and then they obviously will sit down and have a conversation with him to see if maybe they can come back. But Paddy,
it's a big earner for the BBC.
It's a massive earner. It's a huge. So this is a massive blow for them. You know, they would have had so much going into this series in terms of, you know, preparing stunts, obviously getting the cars, filming locations, all of these things. So for this to be cancelled, it's a huge blow for the BBC.
Let's move on to the Gwyneth Paltrow court case.
I'm obsessed with this. this. I have been watching this week. It's got all the old Hollywood glamour. Gwyneth having to come into court, also for the fashion as well, to see what she's wearing. But she's going to be taking the stand later today, so we're going to hear Gwyneth testify. She has been brought to court by Dr. Terry Sanderson. He is a retired optometrist. He said that Gwyneth crashed into him, knocking him to the ground, screaming like King Kong, out of the jungle on a ski slope 7 years ago, and that he's been left with failing vision, psychological problems and what have you. Gwyneth is counter-suing him. He wants $300,000 in damages. She's counter-suing him for $1 in damages. She said he crashed into her and that he was on the nursery slopes going too fast. So today we're going to hear her testify.
How's it going for her so far? I know they said she's wearing soft power clothes to be likeable to everybody who's watching
and
on
she
their jewellery.
wanted to bring treats in today for the court bailiffs.
That's known as bribery, isn't it? Bringing treats in.
Well, she was wanting to bring her goop treats in. I don't know what they were, whether they were baked goods
Stay
or...
off them, I think.
Because remember she has
she's
a candle.
I was going to say, she's so super-duper healthy. Most people don't want her treats, do they?
Well, I didn't know her in the papers. She looks completely different from what you see her in any film.
Yes, well, she's not airbrushed, is she? So it's without the airbrushing and what have you. It's all different.
Well, listen, sometimes with and without your makeup, I can say this, you could look better or worse.
I do have a bit of a soft spot
as a makeup
for
wearer
Gwyneth.
myself.
I think Gwyneth just wants to make everyone improve themselves. I have a bit of a soft spot for her. I think she's a bit misunderstood.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Angela, thank you very much indeed. We're going to get through to some of our GB views now, because we've had loads and loads coming in, but with so much breaking news and different things that's been happening without the programme, we've left some till the end.
Yeah, this was interesting. We obviously had the debate about Ofsted and after the terrible, tragic suicide of a head teacher. Richard here says, I was a teacher for nearly 40 years until I retired. In that time, I experienced many Ofsted inspections and its independent schools equivalent, which are based on Ofsted. Here are a few comments. 1, inspectors often have no experience or knowledge of the subject being taught. I never had in all those years an inspector who knew anything about what I was teaching. 2, chief inspectors were usually failed head teachers who needed a job. And 3, the inspection was woke-orientated. It looked at policies of the school that developed all the current educational woke philosophies. It looked at the students' experience rather than what was taught. So Richard very firmly against Ofsted there from his own personal experience.
And Jared says, when we were on a different topic, and this was the NHS doctors, junior doctor strike, and he said, Jared said, these doctors seem to forget what the NHS is all about. It was to help people who could not afford healthcare and was put there for smaller wages than the private doctors and nurses, but more than an average wage of normal workers. Give them a pay rise, he says, but not a pay rise above 8% to keep the money for equipment for hospitals and to keep up the good work of hospitals. Just a quick one.
Yeah, just back on the Ofsted thing, and it says Ofsted needs to be even tougher on schools who have the responsibility of educating future generations in view of our results against international standards. So lots of views about Ofsted, about junior doctors.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, look, that's all we've got time for today. It's a big thank you to Rebecca Jane and David Wilde, who were with us throughout the show this morning.
And thank you also to Sarah Robertson and Angela Levin, as always. Up next, it's GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
See you then. Bye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Jules and Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30